many pupils taught by Patrick Macdonald is Kate, a music student. She first heard of the Alexander technique whilst she was at school and found that it was not only beneficial to her piano playing, but also to her general way of life. In fact, many colleges of music and drama have adopted the technique as part of their course. Why do other people come here to London to be taught by Mr. Macdonald?
Back troubles.
Back troubles?
Yeah, I had terrible trouble with my back, particularly when I was playing piano. I couldn't sit at a piano for more than about 30 or 40 minutes.
Well, I was a model, a fashion model and a commercial actress in New York, and I misused myself terribly, as all models must, really. And I was also doing long distance running. I was a marathon runner, and so I was further abusing my back that way. And I had heard about it a lot, and then I read something about it, and I started having lessons, and it just helped enormously right from the start.
I suffered from depression, periodic depression, which was a nuisance, sometimes more than a nuisance. And I don't quite know why or how I found out about the Alexander technique. I think I read about it in a book and took lessons, almost in a spirit of desperation. And I was just amazed. I'm sure I'm not typical, that I'm not saying that the Alexander technique will whip your depression away, but it just so happened to do so in my case.
And then you get out of the chair, that's it. And to get into the chair you do that. First, you go up and then you bend your knees and you find yourself falling. But you fall.
Patrick Macdonald himself was taught by F. Matthias Alexander. The technique helped Macdonald with his congenital curvature of the spine, and he has now been teaching for nearly 60 years.
That's it. Whatever you happen to be doing. It's easy to say. And it's always up. Even in fact, though you may be going down, there's an upflow in the whole body. And that's what you've got to be after when you teach.
His approach is straightforward and direct. Amongst his gifts is an ability to break down the complexities of the technique into its most essential elements.
It's very large, it is nearly 180 degrees, and that is a lot. Always up along the spine. Did you feel that? That your head went up out of your body, and your body had to follow afterwards. That's it. And that's the Alexander technique. The basic aims to Alexander technique is to make your body more efficient, and more fluid, more efficient, more natural. And by saying that people should be more natural, I don't mean that they should be more normal, because the normal nowadays is not natural. I mean, in fact, the normal is becoming less and less natural all the time.
Can you elaborate a bit more on that?
I don't know that I can. The people, what people do naturally is often not proper. It is normally wrong. The point is that sometimes it's more normally wrong than at other times. And what you've got to do is to try and get people to be less normally wrong than more normally wrong. And sometimes you might even manage to make them right, but that's another thing. We've got to get him not to contract his body and pull himself down, so we take him and direct his head up out of his body. You do that, you take hold of him, and take his head up out of his body and maintain that upward flow in the back as he bends his knees. He did that quite well.
Students spend at least 3 years at the school learning to become teachers.
That's what we want.
Initially, Macdonald pays attention to each student's proper use, and under his supervision the pupils learn by working on each other.
Flow for him. Take him up, in other words, and lean him back at the same time. And get him further up and further back and further up and further back and further up and further back until he's right back against the chair. That's it. And now you can go on taking him up like that. And I want you to take him forward with the upward thrust in the spine still going on. You carry on, do that. and do further and further and further and further and further. That's it. Now you've still got that length going on in the spine. Now I'll show you something that we don't want. Here we have him here. And we've got the stretch along his spine. And now we're just going to move him forward without the stretch into the spine. We're going to take him down there. So he's losing the thrust up his spinal column, and that is a very unfortunate thing to do. So you must never allow them to do that. When they have done it, you must stop them and start them again.
That is the usual thing, isn't it?
That is the usual thing.
The habitual thing always.
It's the usual thing. They go over there and down there instead of that up thrust in the spinal column.
Right.
They've got to do something that is not going to be comfortable and easy in order to be right. One doesn't want a sergeant major thing of pulling the head back and sticking the chest out. That's the last thing in the world you should do. On the other hand, you shouldn't slump yourself down and make a contraction along your body. That's wrong too. The right is in between those two things. And as I say, I can only explain that with my hands. We'll now demonstrate the wrong way of sitting down, purposely the wrong way. Yes, that's it. That's what we don't want. And it's what a lot of people do. And now I want you to get up out of the chair and do it badly like that, doing exactly the same thing in reverse. So you pull your head back and you get your yes, that's it, exactly what we don't want. Now he's got to change that. He's got to do something completely different. So he lets his head go forward and up, and his back goes back and up, and he goes on with that. Now you can bend your knees. Yeah, that's it. And that's quite good. And if he gets up the same way, that'll be good too. So he takes his head up out of his body. He leaves his body back, and then he goes forward with his head, and that gets him out of the chair. Yeah, that's it. That's it. It's quite simple when you can do it. But I get it's very difficult when you don't know how to do it.
The Alexander technique consists not only of a physical awareness, but also of mental processes, which can be summed up in these 5 principles: recognition of force of habit, inhibition, recognition of faulty sensory awareness, sending directions, and primary control.
They have to learn to get this thrust up their back again and again and again, and let the knees work, and knees and ankles work quite normally and easily, and the legs straighten because the body's gone up. On the way down it's the same in reverse. The knees bend, the knees and ankles bend, and then the body drops because the knees and ankles have bent. It is easy when you know how to do it to let the head go up out of your body and bend your knees and ankles, but it is not easy if your habit is the opposite, because they always do quite a different thing. In order to get down into the chair, they lean forward, as you saw previously, and pull the heads back and stick their bottoms out, which is very wrong and very bad for the whole body. On the way up they do the same thing. They lean forward with their heads back and hollow the back and heave themselves up with their legs. Now this is the thing they mustn't do. They must, if they get up out of the chair, they must take their heads up and make their bodies follow their heads and their legs straighten in order to follow the body. And this is a habit that people really don't know how to do, or most people don't know how to do. You do get the occasional one which does do this naturally, but there aren't many left, at least not in the Western world. Alexander evolved the technique because he'd run into trouble with his voice. In those days, a lot of people did a lot of just personal recitations, and he did quite a lot of that. And he got into trouble using his voice. He found it didn't work very well under certain circumstances, and he couldn't find out why. So he went to various people to try and find out why he's lost his voice and it went wrong on him. And none of them could tell him. So he just said to himself, well, if none of the people can tell me, I will find out for myself. Which this was a very, very important decision on his part. So he started to look in mirrors, and later several mirrors, to find out if he could see what he was doing when he used his voice. And for a long time he was unable to see what he was doing. It looked quite normal, quite natural. And later he began to see it. He was doing certain things with his voice which might be harming his production of the sound. And indeed he found out later on that it was harming the production of his sound. And you can read all about this in the first chapter of The Use of the Self. It's quite a long description of what he did, how he saw it, and how he got able in the end to deal with it. And he finally did deal with it, and he dealt with it by finding that he had to organize his whole body in a different manner. He'd have to do quite different things with himself, not only his voice, but with his whole body. And that was the start of him understanding the Alexander technique. Now, this, what we call the whispered R, is the basis of speech. What you've got to do is to open your mouth in a certain way with a certain freedom there, and then you produce the sound while you're doing that. And first of all we do it with a whisper with practically no sound at all, and then we do it by getting you to make vowel sounds. We usually do the alphabet A, R, or at. And you can do that in a moment. We'll go up there and you smile, upper lip of your teeth, and the jaw forward and drop open, and then make the sound after me. A.
A.
And close and open. R.
R.
And again close and open each time. O.
O.
At.
At.
E.
E.
Et.
It.
I.
I.
It.
It.
O.
O.
Ot.
Ot.
You.
You.
Ut.
Ut.
O.
Ow.
Oi.
Oi.
That's it, that was good. Now, so you notice that each time we made that sound, we had an upthrust in the spinal column. It's just gentle little thing. And this is the important thing that you've got to do when you make a noise. When you talk or whether even if you sing, you must do the same thing. You must get this upflow in the spine to do it. It's easy to say and not quite so easy to do.
Another important feature at the school is table work, where gravity does not affect the spine in the same way as when standing upright. Shoshana Kamenetz, McDonald's colleague, can show her pupil the subtleties of the technique. On the table, the student is not encouraged to do anything. This state of doing and non-doing is fundamental to the learning process.
I'm going to take your head and point it towards me, and see to it that you do not tense your neck muscles, or shall we say, think of releasing them. If there is, at this moment it's quite good. And we are going to point your chin up there rather than what you like usually doing. Is this familiar?
Yeah.
There you are. And you realize, of course, what a difference it makes to your voice too when you get that pressure down.
Yeah. Shoshana, why does my head need to be supported on the table?
You have asked a very good question, and a very important one, as first you will also need to know how much to put under your head when you do this resting position, I could say, at home. And I'll first demonstrate to you what happens if there is no book there. Here, I'm removing the book, and what did happen?
Well, it doesn't feel very comfortable.
Your head went down and even pulled in. You notice that?
Yeah, yeah.
So that creates, of course, a shortening of the spine and the jamming of all joints. Now, when you put the book under, it should be so that your neckline is parallel to the table. Of course, you cannot see it, but I shall be telling you about it. Now I'm going to see that your head points more towards me, and I'm going to go and deal with your leg. And you see to it that you do not stiffen your neck, you go on thinking of it being free. And I'm going to get a pull, a stretch along your leg. I'm going to pick it up. We bend it in the knee to bring it there to a standing position. You leave it alone there. It's nicely, mechanically up here. All you need to do is to continue to think of your knee extending or pointing away from your hip joint. And I'll come back to your head and let's see what happened. That's very nice. And we go on getting the same thing again and again. All right, we'll leave the head there and I'll go back to your other leg and we'll get this leg to point away and we'll pick it up. Up it goes. I believe that something happened here. Are you aware that your chin was pulled in, or you pulled it in, when we dealt with the left leg?
No, I wasn't aware.
Well, this is something that is habitual with you, and of course you wouldn't be aware of it yet. And of course you are here to learn to stop it or alter it into something quite different, which is more like what I'm doing now. And you notice that I have actually taken your head
Back.
up. Well, it may seem back to you, that's a very interesting comment, but it's only because we got the chin to lift up and your head is now pointed up and out.
Yeah.
The thing itself is very subtle, very small, invisible, and actually it is a message that is the translation of this imperceptible, tiny stretch along your spine.
I do feel a release coming anyway.
Exactly. It's through the release also that you can get it. And it's through this that you get the release. And now I'm going to take your shoulder out. While you go on freeing the neck, pointing head up and out, I'm going to get hold of your shoulder blade and get a stretch and a squeeze out.
So my shoulder's going out to the side, is it?
It is.
Yeah.
It is. In a certain round manner. We are going to get this shoulder in a different way to go to the left so that they both pull away from each other while you go on lengthening, and we get this lovely lengthening and flattening of it, all spreading out.
It was originally Patrick Macdonald's father, an eye surgeon, who became interested in the work of Alexander.
Yes. Now, my father had a very bad back. At the age of 40-something, he was in a mess. And not only was he in a mess, but he had developed a tremor in his hand, of his right hand, which made him, it made it dangerous for him to do delicate eye operations. So he was in trouble, and he went to various people to try and get it improved, and they all did nothing for him or made it even worse. And finally, my mother read a book, the book by Alexander called Man's Supreme Inheritance, which she thought might help her husband. And so her husband was dispatched down to London, somewhat against his will, in order to see this quack who might help him. And my father went into Alexander, rather resenting having to go there, and finally got help. Alexander was an extremely good mimic, and sometimes for our edification, he would mimic my father coming in to see him in his consulting room about his bad back and his tremor in his hand. He had my father absolutely taped to the life. He was a perfectly, very good mimic indeed. and very funny it was too. Anyhow, my father got much better with his back after a few weeks with Alexander, and not only that, he lost the tremor in his hand, and that was terrific, really terrific. That was really sold him on the Alexander technique. So he came back to York, our hometown, and said, he said to his wife, you know, my dear, we must have Patrick, who was a very discoordinated little boy, that's me, we must have him down to London and give him lessons in the Alexander technique. So I was taken down to London and started these lessons in the Alexander technique. I resented this very much indeed, because I thought I was pretty good anyway, and in which I was mistaken. And so that is the start of my lessons and interest in the Alexander technique. Now, Alexander was very keen on people being able to get into what he called the position of mechanical advantage. Now, when we were students, we thought that was rather a large mouthful, and we decided to call it something quite different. We called it monkey position. And I'll get you to do it in 2 movements, because it's easier to be done properly in 2 movements. You can do it in 1, but it's more difficult. Now, I'm going to get you to lengthen along your spine with my help there. 1, and bend your knees at the same time. Right, we're going to go up there along the spine there, and continue up along the spine. Now bend your knees. And up along your spine again, and I'll take you forward, so we get that continual stretch along the back and the bend into the joints. And that's a thing that you should learn to do a very large number of times every day, because that's the way to lean down and get things. You can go right down to the floor if you like, if you maintain this up thrust in the spinal column. Now bend your knees, and you can go down there and then pick something up if you want to. Always that thrust up the spine. You see? And it is very important that people should be able to do that sort of thing.
What was Alexander like as a teacher?
Alexander was a good teacher and a bad one. He was both. He was brilliant with his hand. He was brilliant with his brain, of course, in seeing what happened. He was brilliant with his hands in being able to organize your body differently. But he was not brilliant in being able to explain what he was doing to his pupils. And that was one of the troubles in learning the Alexander technique. He was not good at explaining what had to happen and how it had to happen and why it had to happen. He's gotten better in that as time went on. He was very bad in the early days. I remember one man coming out of his room in a rather flustered state. He said to me, as I was just coming in, he said, "What a wonderful man, what an extraordinary man, what a marvellous man." He said, "I can't understand a word he says." And he was rather like that. People didn't understand a word he said. He didn't even explain to people at all reasonably why they couldn't understand what he said. Because you mustn't expect to understand what an Alexander teacher tells you straight away. You have to wait and find out what it is he's talking about and how he's talking about it, and then you can begin to understand. But it is quite easy to make people understand why they can't understand, and just carry on from there.
When you tell a pupil to keep his back, could you explain what it is and what it's not in particular?
Oh, yes, I can explain that quite easily. Now, first of all, we'll take him and move him forward. And we'll move him forward by shoving the back in like that. Now, that's what we don't want. We're getting the body being taken down there, and the head was also going wrong. Now, what we need to do is to keep him back like that. And you must stay back where you are, and we're going to push you forward. So you get that up thrust in the spinal column all the time, with your body back. Do you notice that your body was back then, when we took you forward, and not doing that sort of thing, of pulling your body forward and down, which is the usual thing?
I'm actually a bit against you then.
You're a bit against me, very gently against me, but not very
So
heavily.
in effect, he's leaving his back, but he's not pulling back either, which
He's
often
not pulling
happens.
back. Yes, I'll tell you what, we'll get him to do the wrong thing again, a different wrong thing.
To teach his pupils the meaning of inhibition, direction, doing and non-doing, McDonald draws attention to their habitual misuses, even causing them to go wrong.
Gently back against us. In fact, do it more than gently.
More than gently, push a bit.
Push back.
Okay.
Push back hard. Yeah, now that's what we don't want.
No, he's definitely going back and
He's
down.
definitely going back and down. Now, we're going to get him to push back very gently while we take him forward. That's it.
Yes.
And that's the right thing. Did you notice the difference in what you did then?
Yes, it's got a completely different
getting
quality.
that backwardness of the body and upflow in it at the same time. Well, this is what you've got to do.
I notice that you require your pupils quite often to have their legs wide apart. Is that necessary?
No, it's not necessary, but it's easier. If you get people to do this sort of thing with their feet together, it's a lot more difficult. So I never start them to try and do that. Later on, they have to learn to do that with their feet right together, keeping their bodies back and keeping the upflow going on in their body. But but that's a bit difficult. So we'll leave that till later.
Yes. And I also noticed that in the training course, when you